more sense for me to do this here and deafen myself. It's fun.
Hey man, you got to get those claps right. You feel
You got to
me?
get the claps right, but like also you got to just deafen yourself while you do it because that's how you know it's right.
Like I want any podcast creator to know that if they don't clap right before they start the recording, they need to start the whole joint over again.
100%. I agree completely. All right, well, let's go on and get started. I decided I'm not going to say the title of the podcast because it's going to incentivize me to make a banner for it so I can put it up before the video. Plus, I've been telling everyone the name, so it's all good. But this is my homie, my brother, known him for, it's not too long just yet, but it's about to be too long. AJ Valson, a keys player, a little bit of a rapper, a singer, or whatever he wants to be at the time. Too similar to me at times as well.
Bro, we're nothing alike. What you talking about?
Bro, I don't know who else.
Also, it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's like just a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of time. But freaking, I don't know who else would do almost such a similar track as me to get to being a musician.
Right. But did you drop a mixtape, though?
Look, bro, does it matter?
You didn't drop a mixtape.
Look, I was on one of your
real
EPs,
ones who
so it's
went
the same
to
thing.
undergrad with us remember that I dropped a mixtape, and real ones who also went to Union know that he did not drop a mixtape. So
Look,
let's put this
that
on
may
wax
be true.
right now.
I'm not saying anything about that.
But I'm not a rapper. I like to write, but I'm not a rapper.
Oh man,
Not yet.
well, give it some time, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got you on, and it's been a hot minute since we talked last. Last time we really talked was on your podcast that you did and is now on pause. But what you been up to, man? I know you just moved down to
Nashville. I'm in Nashville now. I'm a New Yorker, faux show. Shout out, like, come on now. Not like that ass. Like, you see, you know the vibes. Yes, I just recently moved to Nashville. I live in the East Side, and because I'm a musician, of course, lifestyle-wise, this made the most sense for me. But as I said, I'm a New Yorker, so that goes into just who I am as a person, into the music, just demeanor, like just all those things. And New York in and of itself is an eclectic place for music. So going into another place that's just full of musical diversity, I think it's really great. And yeah, I haven't been there for too long, but it feels like I could have done it before, honestly. Like that's it's just a glove fit. Mm-hmm. It's a glove fit.
What kind of got you into, well, because not unless they already know you, not too many people know about like your background in music. How have you kind of progressed? How'd you get to where you are now? Like what are you about?
I'm about honestly, I'm about authenticity in music. So what that sounds like, of course it depends. So for me, what that sounds like is acoustic piano. Mm-hmm. So with acoustic piano, and I say this because my current catalog is only piano albums. I have 2 piano albums. The first one came out December 2019. That's Ivory Garden. The second one just came out in June of this year, June 11th, 2021, Ivory Motion, available everywhere digitally. And what that really is just me in my element, me in my most authentic state. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a classical context, in a sacred music context. And with that came like traditional and gospel. Growing up in New York, you're exposed to hip hop, amongst other genres, especially where I was in the Bronx. But really, it's just, again, like going back to the original question, what I create is just what authentically sounds like me. So that doesn't mean I'm always going to make piano music, mm-hmm. but as far as what I have out right now, it's the most authentic expression. And really just going down on a melody level, those melodies are really telling my stories. I call them piano instrumentals, where, you're not hearing any words, but there's really like stories behind every song, and not so much the stories of mine, even though they do set the stage, is really for the listener. If the music was for me, I would have kept it. But the music is for people to listen to and find solace in and find comfort in and enjoy it. So, and you can only do that by being authentic.
Oh yeah, straight up. So like, as you've kind of progressed to this place, has it always kind of been the same kind of mindset, ideas, or like, because I know when we were together in a couple groups here and there, and we would do like jams down in the Haymarket and all this sort of stuff downtown. And so our evolution of playing and performing and stuff, like for me even, has changed and evolved, because when we were doing that kind of stuff, like I wasn't even really singing all that much back then. I was mostly just doing percussion, drums, that sort of stuff. And now I do way more singing than I do of drumming, in fact. Now, and it's all over the place.
Which is crazy, because I know you as a drummer.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like we never sang together, or at least it was like I wasn't really singing all too much, you know. But like where I am now, I remember like one of the times I was playing with you was for your recital that you were doing for jazz piano, right? And I was playing we played Sandu, and then there was another one that I cannot remember to save my life.
Beautiful Love.
Yeah. No. I didn't play that one for you. No, I sang Beautiful Love. So because that was the one that you did play for me, because I also had a recital that same year. And so you came in and played Beautiful Love. But, it wasn't Beautiful Love. It was Free in Autumn Leaves, I think is what it was actually, that you played with /for me /whatever it was.
That sounds more like it. I think we did Beautiful Love because I did an original, I did Sandu, I did Black Orpheus as a duet with my then piano teacher, actually my last piano teacher to date. So shout out Masa for everything that you've done for this craft. Truly honored. But I did a duet with him. I did a duet with my mate Elliot Mosley. And I did a solo piece, and I did Sandu. So I definitely
it must have been Beautiful Love.
It was definitely Beautiful Love.
Wow, I did not remember playing that.
That's it.
Shoot.
Yeah.
I only remember.
Also, shout out
Sandu.
Mitch Benson. Like, he came out of nowhere. Well, he didn't come out of nowhere. Masa recommended him.
Oh yeah.
And somebody was showing me some live footage from the other day, and he's still doing his thing out here in Lincoln or in Nebraska in general. So shout out Mitch Benson for real.
Yeah. But yeah, so like back then, and I remember that was right when I was getting into jazz, and now I've kind of hopped in even more into that space again, like in the vocal space. I've been trying to get back more into the drumming space with that, but there's been so much development I've been making for voice. It's been crazy. But yeah, I remember we used to do more along the lines of gospel type stuff, some jazz sort of stuff, a lot of kind of free kind of whatever kind of stuff going on. Has that always kind of been the case? I know, like you said, because you did primarily classical, starting like classical gospel kind of background, that kind of stuff. And I know, like we've talked, and you'd considered doing like a major until you're like, this isn't exactly what I'm trying to do. So like, what kind of developed and changed through that? How did that kind of inform you?
Well, like you said, everybody knows this if you've talked to me about, my decision-making process as far as pursuing music as a career. There was a point in time that I declared music as one of my majors because my crazy ass decided to double major, but that's another story for another time.
It's a fun time, ain't it?
Yeah, so when I made that decision to consciously, be a musician, but not like, it's really interesting. Like you go to a school and you have this craft, but the craft that you have, it so well, and you're able to tell whether or not the institution or the surroundings can provide you with the necessary growth. So what I'm saying is that when I came into Union, I didn't see that happening for me. On, like I didn't see classes going like, like this is going to blow. Like I was doing a lot of the same stuff, just like more advanced, classical theory and that type of thing. Even, when I was doing what ended up being my minor classes for the music.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing. And that being self-awareness, I had to know for myself, okay, like what am I trying to do? And if not so much what I'm trying to do, how am I trying to do it? I didn't know the what until probably about 2 to 3 years ago, hence
Yeah.
the piano albums.
Yeah.
But I knew the how. I knew the how, and that was good enough for me. So I just went off of that. As I developed professional relationships with musicians such as yourself, that kind of strengthened my decision, because I realized, I wasn't the only one thinking this way. And, leading up to the point where I made piano records, I experimented a lot. And that was just something that, again, like, I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew how I was going to do it. And that manifested eventually as music production. So another avenue, which I'm sure, like, especially at this point in time, the opportunities that is created, music production can really be that cherry popper for a lot of people. And as a musician, it was kind of sort of that way for me too. But it started from thinking like, all right, because I'm in this particular academic setting, I can do this, I can't do this. And that's, you can't really overextend yourself as a person, much less as a musician, at least for me, because I know that whatever I'm trying to do, like, musically, has to come from the right place. Because I've been in situations where I've tried to perform and I was doing it for the wrong idea or the wrong mindset. And I remember very clearly when I was here in undergrad, I was trying to get one more like talent show performance in, but I realized, and it was a very sombering thought. To this day, it still is, like, I'm doing this to get attention. So I completely scrapped the entire thing, and I was like, we're not doing this anymore. I hit up everybody who was going to do it. It was like, hey, we're not doing this anymore. I don't feel right doing this, going up there. Because, I've had a lot of times where the music and the presentation, it wasn't authentic. People weren't resonating with it. And sometimes, like, where you are isn't necessarily where you should be sharing. Like, you should, find a setting that complements your lifestyle. Hence the move from New York to Nashville, at least for me.
Yeah. Like, I find it so interesting too, because you even said that, like, you developed it up until, like, where you knew both how and what, right? But both of them finally came together about 2-3 years ago, right? Whereas for me, it's kind of been similar, but I think the how and both the how and the what for me have developed in the last 2-3 years. So where I didn't really even know how or what, and so I kind of went along the lines and courses of what was kind of just provided and presented and suggested for me. Now I'm looking at the how, what, and I say, okay, what is the purpose for me to doing this? How does it affect, like, who I am as an artist? Like, I've seen you as someone who, over the last 10 years I've known you, right? It always seemed to me, at least, that you kind of knew what your sound was, right? Like, it developed and it grew and it changed and stuff, but you've always kind of had, like, a vision of, like, what your sound was and, like, how it was supposed to kind of work out and sound, and, like, who was on the track or who was doing this, kind of altogether what that sound was, And so as you did that, you developed it. I remember, like, because I remember initially being like, well, this dude knows, like, classical stuff, but he's not doing classical stuff. And it didn't really gel with me, like, my understanding at that time, right? Yeah. Like, you could play, and I was like, this dude knows how to play. He can play by ear. He can play by reading. He can do all this sort of stuff. But, like, the way he's playing isn't even necessarily, like, classical, or it's not necessarily jazz. It definitely has hip hop influence, right? But, like, it's not that, right? And I know, like, we've just been talking since you're visiting Lincoln for a little bit right now, and how you're talking about, like, doing the gospel university stuff, and, like, how, like, the playing aspect of, like, breaking out of kind of, like, your standard, like, mindset of playing, right? Like, evolving that. Like, how did you when did you kind of get this is what my sound is? Like, how did you even stumble upon it? Do you remember?
My sound, and thank you, honestly, my sound is something that it's kind of like learning to speak for the first time, which doesn't make sense to anybody listening, because we're all like, like, we're all humans, we can speak, like, I know that's a very blanket statement. But it really truly is learning how to speak for the first time. at least for me, because when I realized that that's what it sounded like, I was like, oh, like whenever you do anything for the first time, at least for me, I feel that there's a lot of newness and a lot of, cautious, awkwardness to it. And when I was experimenting, it was very interesting because when I was experimenting with music production, especially, I did base everything out of playing melodies. Most producers, there's a handful of producers that would start with a percussion or a beat or a rhythm. I think in melodies, and I'm humming melodies that are inspired by runs, vocal runs, guitar runs, bass runs, piano runs, like just anything that just, virtuoso, like whatever that is. And, those melodies to me represent freedom. So you're on a scale, but you're soloing, you're doing a little run, you're doing walk up and your walk down. There's such a freedom when you're listening to somebody who is like locked into their sound, going from note to note. It's just freeing to listen to, and that's kind of like what pushes me into my sound, and finding that really just, I think it came again from taking the time to dial in and say to yourself, like, okay, at the end of the day, there are so many people who do what I do. Where is your white space? Like, what makes you sound like you? And I knew that I was getting somewhere, even though I was still getting, still in self-discovery.
Yeah.
I'll just go with this story here. So I play a lot when I was in Lincoln. I played a lot in the Don Love Atrium on that upright. And I remember one night I just got finished jamming there. I just like jamming there for a few minutes and just let that be that. It's fun. It's for me it's therapeutic. I got a text after that happened, or maybe not even after that happened, but just randomly. And somebody basically said like, "Hey, like I heard you playing around the corner," and I was just like, I had a sense that it was you playing. So that really spoke to me because it reminded me that the intentionality that I have behind trying to find an authentic melody and sound, and finding the freedom in those notes, like that, it was definitely happening. Now, keep in mind, like, we're talking about somebody who just put out piano records like 2 years ago, but has been playing piano his whole life. For me, it's interesting because I spent the rest of that time in another dimension musically, when realistically, I kind of did have it in me to have those melodies out. It just wasn't something that I focused solely on, because at the end of the day, no matter how much experimenting I do, I'm a pianist.
Yeah.
I'm a pianist, and like it makes sense for the genesis to be Ivory Garden and now Ivory Motion. I know I said, for those listening from the very beginning, I know that I said that I have a mixtape, but there were a lot of projects, as it is with most musicians, a lot of projects that up and coming artists put out leading to the first body of work that they can fully stand behind, that get taken down for revision and that. And that was just one of those times, because again, like there were so many aspects that I had to learn and dial into, and that's just the craft of music.
Straight up. So tell me, because I mean, with this podcast being about just like current not even necessarily like new music per se, right? But like how to be kind of relevant, even, you could say, because it's music currency. Like, how are you being relevant to your own sphere? Like, how do you like focus on like your sound in a way that like garners an audience that's looking for you, like how do you develop it yourself? And more importantly, from my perspective, I like to think of it in ways of like, what was it that you recognized, especially back when you were thinking like, let me go to school to do this, or like use school as an avenue to get to this place. What was it that enticed you to do it? And then what was it that made you realize, you know what, this isn't where I'm gonna be doing the how, right? Like I need to do the how on my own, or I need to do my how somewhere else, away from like an institutional space. Like what was it that did it for you?
What did it for me as far as just wanting to do things like on my own?
Yeah.
Well, again, I think it really came to a head when I realized that, I mean, it comes in waves, honestly. Like learning about yourself. If you've known me over the past few years, I do talk about it a lot, and I talked about it a lot before, but I'll say it again. Knowing yourself. It really came to a head when I realized that I had to look out for myself no matter what. And that means like as a musician. So I really enjoy collaborating. Part of that comes from a need to, want to like tap into somebody else's creativity and like work on something in conjunction with that person to come out with something great. Because I know that if I do handle something myself, it's only like, I was really about just trying to collaborate and work with as many people as possible in the beginning. Like I remember in undergrad writing up all these arrangements for cover medleys and everything. And I mean, literally everything involved other people. There wasn't anything that I was completely handling by myself. Because I just didn't have that confidence. But what hurt my confidence even more was trying to rely on these ideas to be successful in order for me to feel like I did something musically worthwhile.
Like ideas like what? Like you're talking about like from school, like what kind of ideas?
Yeah, anything from like cover arrangements to like, yo, you want to hop on this track, or like, yo, can you help me with this artwork? Like, all these different aspects. And you really start seeing like who's really about it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, when you're an undergrad, you're also trying to figure out what you're wanting to do, with your next step and things like that. So there's a lot of people that I've had the pleasure of spending time with creatively that ultimately went on to do their other things, whether it was something that related to music, but just for themselves or not at all. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But the point being, knowing that I was trying to do things, like for me was understanding that like I couldn't really do it for anybody else.
Yeah.
And during that time that I was coming up with all these ideas, I had a band. So the band kind of served as like the avenue for making all these things possible. And in some way we did do it. But I realized that, harnessing a lot of creative energy in one room is very difficult.
Yeah.
So I went solo. And again, it was a self-awareness thing. There are, like my cousin Nate, he has a band called Vibe. That's Vibe No E. Like it's VIB, Vibe No E. And he has a bandmate in there. Even though he, as a musician, understands that he can handle pretty much anything that's thrown at him. Phenomenal keys player, also plays bass really well, and organ and all this other stuff. So, like for him, that makes the most sense, like him carrying out his vision. But for me, I knew that I had to kind of handle things on my own in order to kind of really find me. Because ultimately the music that I put out is very, very vulnerable and personal.
Yeah.
And I almost feel more comfortable sharing at this stage instrumental music because it allows the privacy of whatever moment I'm writing about to be maintained, but still create an environment where like, all right, people can listen to this and, they can really feel that emotion that I'm trying to convey, even though they might not know the particular story, but it's real.
So your learning of this was more like you realized it was you needed to just do some fleshing out, like separate, whether it be away from like a band and groups of creatives, right? Or even from like school where like, cause everything's so structured in there that like, was it even really necessarily providing opportunities for you to kind of flesh that out on your own, or what was kind of the vibe with that?
It was really confidence, the confidence to be able to do things on my own. I think.
So was that something you were getting from the school, or was that more something you were just separate kind of thing?
I had to tap into me. I think what I was getting from the school, what I was receiving from the school was not what I was wanting for my artistic fulfillment. So again, going back to like speaking for the first time, you know, if you try speaking for the first time, let's just say theoretically you're in a position where you're trying to speak for the first time, you know, I imagine that there is a little bit of, you know, it's a little awkward at first, you know, you're trying to like, you know, find like, you know, you don't talk articulate like this, like on the first try, like it takes some time. Like you don't fly on the first try, like it takes some time. Yeah, it's really just taking the time to say like, all right, I had to tap into me because, you know, it was in me all along.
Yeah.
I really do feel that these melodies that I'm sharing now, these ideas that I have, the more I really sit on them and like give myself the confidence that this is a good idea. And knowing how do you talk to yourself is important too. Self-talk.
Yeah.
For anybody that's listening out here, take the time to listen how you're talking to yourself in situations, especially situations that make you uncomfortable or you're not sure about, and you realize how, you know, significant that is through your subconscious in your everyday life. And so when I tapped into that for myself, especially with music, you know, I realized that like, yeah, I have it in me. I have a lot of work, you know, to do to make this like the best possible version. But it's believable because it's real. It's me, you know?
Yeah. So what was it that like made you then, now that we're fast forwarding a little bit, right? You've come out of school and you're like, cause you moved back up to New York after a while of still staying in Lincoln, right? You moved back up there and you were there for what,
4 years.
4 years, right? So you were there and kind of what all were you doing there? Like along your musical journey as you were progressing?
As a musician in New York, from 2017, 2018, 2019 is really defined by actually music education. I had the wonderful opportunity of teaching some fantastic kids, actually really up until a couple months ago. But it all started in like 2018. And when you go back to the rudiments of anything, it's kind of a self-evaluating time. So being able to assess where I was musically while I was teaching these kids really helped me figure out what I need to work on. So it was really more time spent on education. But it's funny because during this time also the piano records were being created. And by the time that I started coming up with the ideas for the first record, Ivory Garden, I had all these demos, like just demos. I learned at the very least that if I'm recording while I'm practicing or noodling around, I can go back later and find something that I could further develop into a real song. So by the time that I realized that I had way too much and I just needed to start organizing stuff, that was 2018, early 2019. And that was a cool moment because it's not that I wasn't creating. I always was creating. It's just that much like my writing, I have a bank that I kind of store everything into. And at certain points, I say to myself, okay, let's break this bank and see like what gems we got in here and what we can use and what we can share. So really during those 4 years, other faculties were getting developed, but I think that without those, it wouldn't have made me into a more complete musician because like I said, man, this was an amazing time for me to break down what I love for kids who are just so eager to learn, so willing to just spend time with you. And, you know, every kid is different as far as their needs.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're when they see that you're genuinely interested in your success, they'll get on board and really make the most of it. So developing education, also really just like refining. I'd say like I wasn't going through piano demos to create a piano album during my last couple of years in Lincoln.
Yeah.
I was producing like crazy. I was staying up super late, like making beats. At one point I did 100 days where I just made something new every day, really just for self-discovery. All these things were just building blocks, man. All of them.
Yeah. That's dope. So like you went from kind of, if we were to kind of put it in stages, you were doing like creation and stuff while here in Lincoln, just working out that creative, like, what can I make? What are the sounds? What is like just the exploration and stuff. And then you get your time up in New York back home and you're there refining, working through, especially how did that educating kind of relate to that refining, or like what was it that kind of, because you started refining, right? And like you just focused on that so much more. And that education aspect, like what were kind of some takeaways with it? Was it just like it helped you kind of gain that perspective on like, these are some of the things I'm teaching these kids, let me see how I can lock them down better, or how did that kind of work out?
Okay, yeah. So just really just like what were some of the benefits of, being in seeing like the relations between the refining and like the education. Well, it really helped me. This is kind of funny. This is less serious than anybody's listening is like, wow, this guy's intense. Oh my gosh. The funny thing with some of these demos is that I found myself doing a lot of similar progressions.
You're talking like chords.
Yeah. So like I would do 2-3 2-5-1 with the melody being like almost identical in a different demo, like that kind of thing. So, and this wouldn't happen all the time, but like every now and then, like I noticed that like, these ideas are probably just floating in my head, like waiting to be fleshed out. Or B, I need to further my musician's vocabulary and just get like even deeper and deeper, because for me, there's always something to learn. You mentioned Gospel University earlier, and that's just one of the avenues that helps me dig deeper into becoming a better pianist and a better musician and a better artist. So learning how much overlap there was in my library was really interesting. Yeah. What was also interesting was talking to my kids about what I was working on, because they would be the ones saying like, oh my gosh, like, do you have an Instagram? Is your music on iTunes? Is it on Spotify? And like, these are genuine questions coming from kids who are excited that, their teacher, is doing something that's just beyond the 30 minutes and they want to be involved with that and engage with it. To this day, there are still students who follow the journey, which is amazing because they're a part of that. Yeah. So yeah, just bouncing the ideas of them. I remember talking to students about like what I'm called like, what's the album name? Oh, Ivory Garden. Oh, what's that mean? So, explaining to them like the concept of having, a lot of pianos on the same record and it being a garden of ivory, which is, you hear the phrase tickle the ivories all the time. And it's, it's a funny phrase. It's funny to say. But I wanted to, tribute that even further into something where it's like, all right, if you hear ivory, you're going to think about piano music. When you think about piano music, I want you to find your way back to this. And and during that time also, not only am I listening to feedback from my students, not only am I like refining my library as far as my piano demos are concerned, I'm also listening to I listen to a lot of other pianists that make, I wouldn't say similar to my sound, but it's in the same ballpark. So a couple examples for those who are curious and want to do more research: Nils Fromm, German pianist, and composer. He also does a lot of ambient electronic stuff, but he has a couple records that are just piano, such as the Screws album, that are very beautiful, very minimalist piano. Oliver Arnold's is another example of that. Very similar instruments compared to Nils, and they've worked a lot together on records, but there are some records where it's just piano only. Otto Totlin, I believe is his name, is another one. There's a few others that don't come to mind off the top. I mean, Tony Anderson has a couple of piano pieces, even though his genre is more considered ambient electronic as well. But the point being, like, there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah. It's biblical just as it is practical. I don't think that what I'm doing is unique. Yeah. Like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, I got the next best piano album out. I just think it's real. I just think it's honest. And that just came from being honest with other people and being honest with myself. Yeah.
And that's real cool too, because it shows how like you draw from the inspirations of others, but it's not like any new idea doesn't have its feet and toes in all sorts of other areas and ideas. Because like where you mentioned like a lot of like the idea of like ambient piano stuff, right? Or like electronically influenced, especially as well, kind of piano stuff. One of the names that came to my mind when thinking of like that kind of style is Ryuichi Sakamoto, you know? Yeah. And I'm like, similar but not the same, because he's got so many different film scores and stuff, and he lays heavily into piano, and that's something I've been listening to fairly recently. But like that idea of like, there's all these people, right, that are doing kind of the same thing, but not really, right? Yeah. And that it's being like authentic, right? It's you being honest of how, like, of your musical interpretation of how the music's speaking to and through you. That's what's real. That's so awesome about it, because like I try and think of, I wouldn't even necessarily call yourself like ambient piano, right?
No, definitely not.
Exactly. Right. But to hear all the different influences that come from ambient piano, pseudo electronic, what have you, like you can start to kind of piece together, like, okay, I can kind of see those connecting lines, which is something that like I'm always about, like I don't know if I ever told you this, but like when I started my undergrad, like the year before, I remember like I was thinking to myself, I was like, all right, this kid who listens to primarily hip hop and alternative rock is coming in to music school, where somehow I had the understanding even then that traditional music school is mostly classically driven, right? So I was like, oh no, I don't listen to classical music. Like the thought was, oh no, I'm gonna have to start to like classical.
I want to give a shout out to anybody who just like plays Brahms just cause like because you're right, nobody really does. Anyways, continue.
Oh yeah, but like I was like, oh no, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to like classical, like listen to all this stuff,
right? Exactly.
But when I came to that thought, for some reason my mind went the direction of, all music is related one way or another, right? Like in that same idea of there's nothing new under the sun. And so for me, like my philosophy with it is like, where are those connections, right? What is the connecting bridge between a classical piece and a hip hop track, right? Like how many things you got to string along to finally get that connection,
Yeah. But when you ask that question, there's different genres and different sonic influences, but it's all based on sound, is it not? So all of these names and categories are just names and categories. There's I tell people modern classical when they ask me what I do as far as music, because it's the best way to kind of label it. But there really is no label. It sounds like me and you sound like you, unless you're trying to sound like Macklemore and then you just jacking Macklemore. You feel what I'm saying? But if you sound like you, then your genre, I mean, like genre is becoming a very ambiguous term.
Oh, it's weird because it's like you could try and describe genres at a certain point, right? But now, like, good luck.
Historically.
Yeah, historically. And that's the thing. Matter of fact, I was talking about this on the last episode of like how I try and like even describe classical, right?
Yeah.
Like you could say like, and I can't because I know it's not really accurate, right? But you could say classical music is just old music, right? You could say that, but then you look and you're like, well, there's still people making modern classical, or there's still people making classical style or whatever you want to say music today. And then you're like, okay, but how do you define that style?
Right.
You know?
And then you say, oh, they got violins. Yellow Card has a violin.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Like,
so it's just, again, it's a label. It's something that, you know, it will guide the person who receives that information. It will guide their mind in the direction of like, oh, okay, like, I have an idea of what it is, but you know, there's such a blend, and especially with the opportunities that production brings, you can bring so many different sounds from so many different kits into one song, and that happens all the time, every time,
and in all sorts of different genres too.
Right?
Like you can have the same instruments on a death metal track as you have on a hip hop track.
That's a fact,
and it'll sound totally different, and you'll have those same instruments on a freaking disco track, especially too, or a country track. Like it doesn't matter what it is. Even things that aren't exclusively Western influenced, right? Like or like our concept of Western music influenced, right? Like they'll have their equivalents of instruments, right? Or maybe they'll even use the same instruments, right? But the sound is just so different, you know? So it's not even like, it doesn't inform you what that style really is. You know, it's how you put it together. I remember a friend of mine, Noah, he composed this awesome song. I don't remember what it was. It was like something called like George Goes to Space or something. Like it's about like a monkey traveling through space. That's like the title and like the background for the story. And I was like, this is a sick, like I remember seeing the people come together for it, right? To play it. And there was a drummer, a violinist, I think an electric bass, acoustic piano, did I already say cellist? Because there was a cellist. Acoustic guitar and electric guitar, right? So there's this whole combo, and you're like, what? What is this?
Right.
Like, I don't, like, what category does this immediately fit into, right?
Yeah, and see, that's the problem. You know, we're always trying to box something instead of just enjoying it for what it is.
Oh, straight up. And when I tell you, I was like, this is amazing. And I was like, this is like I thought of it immediately as like, this is exactly how George Goes to Space. Like it was literally the soundtrack to like the journey. And I was like, this is awesome. This is sick. You know, but like if you try and describe it, what would you describe? I don't know. Like
right.
but do you need to? You know?
I feel like it's better to describe elements and understand them as elements rather than, you know, talking about it in genres and expect people to be like, you know, because people will be like, oh, you do hip hop music. So when people say they do hip hop music, you know, they're not saying, oh, you do hip hop music. It's like, oh, you rap. Like, you know, it's like, there's almost like musical euphemisms in like certain ways. It's just like, oh, you do country music. You know, like, you know, it's just like,
oh, you twang.
Like, oh, you twang, you know, like, and I wouldn't say that's the same for everybody.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Kane Brown, like he twangs, but, you know, he twangs and, you know, his 808s also bang. So like, I get that. I totally get that. Don't ask me how I know about Kane Brown. All right? That's not important. But yeah, man, like if it doesn't, like people are just trying to like categorize what they listen to. And I feel like that's becoming less and less relevant because, you know, why are we spending so much time trying to categorize something when we should just enjoy the art for what it is? Imagine going to a set list and, you know, seeing like, oh, like here's this live hip hop jazz band. And, you know, at certain points, like it goes like, you know, R&B or even funk. And like you're such a purist that you can't enjoy it because it's not like what you expect. Like imagine going to a concert and not enjoying the concert because the musician is diverse. Like it's really like we got to get past the point of, you know, labeling music for the sake of like having a satisfactory definition.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It like, because like it means something. Like, also the same reason why I think we should stop debating who's top 5 that are alive, because it's just like people have that conversation expecting, you know, some finality.
Well, it's Mozart, obviously, and Mozart and Mozart.
Yeah,
and then Beethoven.
100%. But
Those are the top 5.
Some people will be like, "Oh, Biggie, J, Nas, Tupac, Eminem," and like people like, "No," and then like somebody like,
"Oh, you're right."
Somebody has
and J's in there, so it's J,
right.
Mozart, Beethoven.
Yeah, exactly. So people get so pressed over finality when it comes to explaining music, instead of enjoying the music for what it is and saying things like, you know, Jay was the most influential, you know, for New York.
Yeah.
Just as Kanye West was for Chicago, just as Tupac was for the West. You know what I'm saying? And Biggie was for the East. Like, look at how I uplifted everybody without putting down anybody. Like, we don't talk like that because we're wanting to establish a hierarchy or whatever. Like, yeah, like I get it. You feel this way about Trippie Redd versus somebody like Machine Gun Kelly, but you know, enjoy the music, man. Like, you know, everybody's sitting over here pressed trying to like figure it out. It's just like sometimes, like, especially for the people who actually make the music authentically, like those are the ones that you should worry the least about.
Yeah.
As far as like what they sound like, because they didn't like, yeah, they might have made a record with a specific sound you know, like for the sake of their concept, you know, especially if they're working on a whole album or a record.
Yeah.
But for music to be such a cathartic experience, the last thing that you want to do is worry about what like what do we label this as?
It's like put it as a formulaic sort of thing. So here's a question then. Like, how do you teach it then?
How do you teach what?
How do you teach music? How do you teach style? How do you teach someone, like, how do you get someone to go like in their direction, right? Like, you don't know what influence is going to necessarily spark them into a direction, right? Or like what grouping of, let's say, right? Like if you're going to make, because you made your piano records, right? But let's say you make a record that uses like your sound and your idea, but uses like string quartet.
Yeah.
Right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, like how are you gonna, like where do you get the understanding of using a string quartet, right? Like where would your reference be for those? I mean, there's definitely examples of it, right? But like, what is kind of the path that you go along to find this? Or like, is there a way that you can teach it?
To compose and arrange?
Maybe. I mean, compose and arrange.
You're talking about adding a string quartet in the composition. So that's a part of arranging and composing.
I mean, yeah. But I mean, like, also, like, but where do you get those? Because my thought process is this, right? Because if I took like a composition arranging class, right, and it was focused in the quote unquote like classical style of composition and arrangements, right? Where we'll be looking is maybe like Brahms string quartets. We'll be looking at like Beethoven quartets and stuff.
Okay.
But like if you're doing your sound, right? How beneficial is the Brahms and Beethoven string quartets to maybe someone that's like actually do, like you said, Niels Brahm, right?
Yeah, Niels Brahm.
Like if like someone like him, right? If he was writing quartets and stuff, or Ryuichi Sakamoto writing their quartets, like what's the difference between those? Would it be more beneficial to you maybe to kind of look into their quartets, see how they're writing them, or do you see yourself as getting the same value out of it from just looking at exclusively Brahms, Beethoven, one of those kind of quartets?
I think the answer is going to be different for everybody. Again, you're talking about a creative process.
Yeah.
What you create is all dictated by what you have absorbed as your influences, good, bad, indifferent. Like all those things are put into, you know, what is my current discography.
Yeah.
You know, when you talk about the exclusivity of looking at classical versus expanding and looking at other things, again, that's, you know, you're talking about a process that's so specific to what people already know, and to what people already know about like themselves as far as the process. I mean, when you look at it from another way, you do. It's really more so the what's my thought here? What was the question?
I said, what, like, how would you go about teaching it, right? Like, is there like let's pretend there's a guaranteed way? Because I don't think there's a guaranteed way to ensure that you'll find like your voice faster or slower, or like to ensure that you will find your authentic sound, right? Because like you said, it's about those influences. Whatever you've experienced, good or bad, it kind of helps shape you.
Yeah.
Right. And so if that's the case, right, what's the benefit of trying to structure everything like in a particular way, right? Because I'm coming at it from the idea of someone that's still in like music school, right? In music academia, institutionalized music kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
Like, if, like, is there a benefit you see to maybe changing the structure up, like having diverse structures that kind of can meld or assimilate better with what the student or what the individual musician kind of sees or seems to be developing, right? Like, because I think like if there was more opportunity for you to like within school develop your production, right? Develop your sound by the way that you were going, right? Like, maybe it was beneficial for you to kind of stay in school in the same way that doing gospel university at this point is something beneficial, because you see it as like, oh, this is put together in a way that I can kind of connect with it and take those ideas and assimilate them into my sound, right? But like, what about doing gospel university is different from you like studying Ravel and Brahms and Debussy, right?
Okay. Well, you mentioned curriculum as it pertains to a music student. And I think anybody that's educating for music, because that's what I can speak on. If you're educating in music, you have to, and you absolutely have to understand, firstly, what your student is trying to get out of it. The same way that I would approach an extroverted student is completely different from how I approach an introvert. And I know that sounds really basic, but there's a really significant yet subtle power in just knowing how to read the room and understand, like, okay, this person, I actually have to talk less with the student, or this one I have to talk more with them. Like, you got to tap in, you got to dial in and really understand what it is that they are wanting to get out of it.
Yeah.
Verbal conversation, and also understanding their nonverbals. When you're talking about, when you're in academia and you're trying to figure out the again, music education, you have to cater accordingly. That's just the bottom line. I mean, as similar as we are as musicians in certain ways, like instruments as an example, we are also very different.
Yeah.
And it has to be treated as such. I work in a healthcare context where I always remind people that I'm on the phone with, and these are people that haven't visited the facility yet. I always remind them that they can, that everybody's different as far as their condition and symptoms. So when I'm asking them about their condition and their symptoms, and I'm taking notes on that, I'm letting them know because everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of, several moments that I engineer in those types of calls where I make it very clear what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and it's received well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you do that in a music context where, you read the room, you understand the needs and the wants of your prodigies, then you take that step and be like, all right, like this is how it's going to get done. And you have to cater accordingly. So I believe that that's the answer because that's what worked for me.
Mm-hmm. Kind of reassessing and catering towards like what that student's interests are, right? Now, because we actually kind of touched on this in the last episode too, where it was like, but then like at an institutional level, you got to cut something, right? Wherever you add something, you got to cut something, or where you put in a new idea, you got to replace a different one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you make that like sustainable for like an institution? Like, do you think that's like kind of something that can be done? Or do you think, because I'm of the mindset, or I've grown into the mindset of better understanding like what would be so beneficial about just having a mentor, right? Like a music mentor that it, or a coach or whatever, in whatever sense, right? That is more specifically focused on doing just that, right? Where you say, I want to do this. And they're like, all right, let's look at it from this perspective. Let's look at influences that kind of help develop this sound, this kind of feeling that you're kind of getting at, right? But if you like pivot and say, well, I want to do something that's completely different, or it seems like it's completely different, right? And then that mentor is like, okay, well, that's not exactly my wheelhouse, right? But this is kind of where I would go, to find this kind of sound. Or this is someone I think you might want to start talking to get more acquainted with that sound, right? I don't see that necessarily as being as easily feasible all the time within an institutional music context, because there's a lot at stake, right? Because like if I came into school right now and was like, I am wanting to focus on hip hop, right? They ain't got any hip hop classes, right? They don't really have any songwriting classes either, right? There's composition, right? And like you could do directed studies or whatever, right? With composition professors or what have you. But like to do like songwriting, right? And what kind of song are you writing? Like what is the sound of your style? What's all this sort of stuff? Like how do you, within that kind of institutional context, like where can you get that? Or how, like, do you think it's something that like you as a student, as a musician, as an artist can develop it? Is it something you can develop from within that's feasibly possible to develop? Or because I think at some point or another you're gonna have to branch outside, right? But what kind of creative ways do you think you could still develop that from within? Or even can you really, without it being more beneficial to just break out?
Break out and discover outside.
Discover on your own, find your own mentor, find your own kind of like related sounds or whatever.
Well, I think now is the perfect time to drop this one-liner because I kind of wanted to put it at the beginning, but understanding that this is your platform, I wanted to wait for the perfect time. So what I wanted to say was 3 words: question your convictions. It's on that sticker that I showed you.
Oh yeah.
So question your convictions. This is for me, this is a very powerful phrase in my life. I got it on a sticker from a good friend, Lisa. She's a graphic designer in New York City. Very talented, very unique style. Her account is Red Halftone on Instagram. She's super dope. And she has I think it's a marketing agency called Untitled Era. And anyways, great person, great artist. And she has these designs where in front of the illustration, there's usually a banner that has a very short phrase. And one of them says, question your convictions. I think when you are, again, I'm saying this because I say it a lot. I think when you're learning yourself, when you're practicing self-awareness, listening to your self-talk, how you talk to yourself, I think it should be done in a way where you are being gentle with yourself, as far as, understanding that self-work does take a lot of time, and that's okay. I also think that it's important to, in addition to be kind to yourself while doing it, be honest with yourself while you're doing it, which means for me to say, like, all right, if you are feeling X, if X happens and you do Y, are you suppressing the Y of it? Like, are you suppressing Y and then just, continuing to react the same way? Or are you going to one day say, when X happens, I'm actually going to do Z because I'm a better person? So when we're talking about music, as far as, reaching out for mentors, reaching in, again, it starts from the beginning of just saying, like, what do I want to get out of this? Because a lot of times the only people that find themselves in the position of questioning is the ones that, if you're asking a lot of questions in a scenario where you feel like you should have answers, then, it might be time to reevaluate. So when we talk about music and saying, hey, like, I want to, be a certain kind of way, learn a certain thing, a lot of it is just placement. You have to be in the best possible position to make a difference as far as what you're trying to accomplish with your art. That's why I moved to Nashville. And that's where a lot of people actually lose their way, because they want to engineer the best circumstances out of a shitty situation. And it could be a shitty situation with music. It could be that way with, what happens outside of music, which of course reflects inside, because a lot of musicians are really just sharing their personal experiences through song. Myself included, yourself included. So, just taking the time to say, hey, like, is this something that I really should do, and should I do it here? How should I do it? As far as what's already put in place by, so-called thought leaders who are kind of taking the charge on these different, whether it's a institution or even the more modern version is subscription-based Patreon, or, channel that's dedicated to providing information, that will help their target audience. No matter what it is, you have to make sure that you're doing that. You're pursuing that for the best possible reasons. Again, I started the interview talking about authenticity and how I'm after a sound that sounds like me. And you can't be authentic if you're trying to put yourself in places where, as a person, you shouldn't be in.
I think that's super dope. Just the realization, right, of questioning your convictions, of really looking and assessing. When you start questioning something, right, it's kind of an indicator, really, that maybe you do need to refine a part of the process. Maybe what you thought at a certain time was beneficial isn't necessarily as beneficial as it once was, or once could have been, right? Because we're always evolving and we're always changing. And especially as musicians, as artists, we're always shaping and creating, even like on a minute, like little tiny scale.
Always processing.
Right? Always processing and always developing, so that we can further and further become more authentic, with our sound. So when we look and we assess, and I think something that I ran into, at least, was because I was like, I've looked and assessed, and I've been in school for so long studying music, where now I'm like, oh, there's some things that I think from school are beneficial, but then there's other things that now I realize the potential that I have outside of school, and I have to balance and weigh, like, is what I'm learning from school equally, if not more beneficial than what I would be learning outside of school. You know, that's a huge thing. I mean, that's something you had to address and you had to assess and deal with.
Exactly.
You know, but I think the biggest of key takeaways from that is that eventually it'll happen one way or another, no matter where you are, whether you're in, out of school, like whether you've gone or you haven't, you know, like you're going to always assess your situation and you're going to say, the decision I made to be here, right? Should I continue with that decision or should I branch to a new decision? Do I need to divert entirely and go a totally unexplored path for myself or for whoever, right? Or can I stay along this general path that at least has people that have gone it before? And will I get out of it what I want? You know? And when confronted with the realization that the option to not go the standard route is the one that you should probably go, I think though it's scary, you know, that's all right. You know, because at the end of the day, we all kind of realize when we've got to take the non-standard route, when we've finally kind of broken into our voice, our space, our authentic selves. And as soon as we find that, no matter to what scale it seems that is, you know, we got to say, you know what, this is the time for it, and just kind of trust that process that we've developed, you know, and just keep saying, you know what, we are being authentic, you know, this is where my authentic sound is going.
I'll tell you what, the mixtape that I joked about, that was my actually very first project I ever put out. Self-produced, wrote everything, made every beat. At the time, I did not know about engineering, so it was mixed A1. I'm just playing. It was not. It was terrible. I recorded the vocals in my bedroom closet because I wanted to know that feeling of just being like, I wanted that like underdog like kind of feeling where I was just kind of doing everything real raw and without any like
fan in the background, dogs barking in the streets.
Right. But it's funny because at that time I did have access and a network to actually go into a studio and work on this stuff. I was just really obsessed with, you know, working on the whole thing myself and just being able to say like I did every aspect of this. Because that's the kind of person I am as far as my art. Like I want to be able to own it and own it proudly. And when other people are listening to it, they know too. Yeah. I brought up the mixtape because to this day, nobody has ever, I mean, it's not accessible anymore, but that's besides the point. I never really got any feedback from the mixtape about, you know, how songs impacted them. And I'm talking about, you know, unsolicited, you know, just out of nowhere, like, yo, by the way. But when the piano records were being made and I put out 2 music videos from Ivory Garden. I didn't put out any visualizers yet for Ivory Motion because of the transition. But when these videos came out, that's when people were saying, whoa, okay. Not saying that the music that I put in the mixtape was bad. Yeah. You know, like I still think those beats are super hot fire. Definitely top 5 producers that are alive, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, straight up. Right up there,
you know what I'm saying? And that's the confidence that you need to have.
Mozart. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You know, like Jay got his thing, Mozart got his thing, but you know, like have you heard CST? Can't Stop This? Yo, that beat is fire, bro. Like don't like I'll just say this now because I'll say this now because I said fire. One of the opening lines of one of those songs on the mixtape was, I just started a fire with my ashy black ankles. So yeah, that's fire, bro. Like, I don't know. I'm gonna re-release it one of these days, and I'm gonna keep that line to stay true because
straight up,
I just started a fire with my ashy black ankles. I can't relate to that because I do lotion, but
name that the album. As a matter of fact, just go all in.
Right, exactly. But yeah, man, I did not hear anybody contacting me. Like nobody contacted me about the mixtape, but people contacted me about the piano albums, and they still do. And I really think it's because it is my authentic music at this point. There's so much more to discover as far as my sound, the projects that I've worked on during quarantine, some, and like other projects at different times. All of those are going to be expansions of, you know, what is currently out. But again, that is a discovery process of itself, because there's going to be more elements involved, which means that it's going to be more time. It's going to be more investments made into it. And the most important part about that whole thing is to just trust it. To just trust it completely. I mean, set deadlines, set goals, all that stuff, but, you know, trust your process to where it's like, all right, if this is going to take 2 to 3 years, you know, I'm not going to try rush it and put it out in one, because then it's not going to sound real.
Straight up.
You know, you're I hate listening to records. This doesn't happen all the time, but I hate listening to a record where you can tell some of the tracks were just plugged into the album, just you know, just for the sake of filling it up. Like every song, every single track that's on my catalog, with the exception of one, because my cousin Nate, shout out Nate, N8MLVL on IG, phenomenal pianist. He played a record on my last album called the Dr. Chocolate Interlude. He likes to call himself Dr. Chocolate, but that's another conversation for another time. Yeah, every song on my record, with the exception of that one, you know, that's just me being real. And like, that's me sharing, you know, really hard stories, recalling like really tough memories, and also really happy moments, and just putting it to piano, and like, and just let that be that, you know. Like, sometimes when you're experimenting, aka the mixtape, you know, there was obviously, because I was rapping, I said a lot of things on there, and I was a lot younger during that time as well. So even though the rhymes were fire, the subject matter might not have been authentic enough, because it was still something that there were like some songs were about situations that don't even matter anymore, or you know, some other songs were, you know, just to get, like, I did put 22 songs because it was a golden birthday mixtape, and I turned 22 on that day. So I had a lot of tracks. I mean, realistically, like, I wouldn't listen to an album that long. And, you know, again, that's just like tapping into, you know, understanding what's best, and again, reading the room. Like, you think about your end product and reverse engineer that, and say like, hey, like, if I drop this record, are people going to play all 22 tracks, or are they going to listen to the first 3 and be like, yo, that shit sounds good?
Straight up.
Like, what do you want out of it? And then whatever that answer is, like, all right, so let's get to work.
That's what's up, man. Well, I think that's probably pretty good. We talked for a hot while.
Hot while, man.
Hot while, bro. But yeah, glad you were able to come here and be on.
Yeah, and I want to take the time to thank everybody for listening to, you know, what Daniel and I had to discuss regarding just, you know, music. And again, the conversation was very focused on authenticity. I see those as two things that are very related in my experience. And I also say that because I don't see a lot of people, at least as musicians, you know, really sharing that. Everything is in accordance with their journey and how they share it, and like, that's one way to be authentic. But I think, you know, being very plain about our language and how we speak about certain things is important. So let's just say it right now. Like, let's be authentic musicians. And sometimes, as I said before, being authentic means preventing yourself from doing something creatively that you know won't benefit you in the long run. To this day, I do not regret pulling myself out of that performance, because the type of emotion that was fueling me at that time was not healthy. And I would have been putting myself out on the stage and exposing, you know, the inferior version of, you know, who I really was. And I feel like that's really important to think about, because it really does show you that when you say, you know what, I'm going to be real, even though it's going to be painful and vulnerable, you're so much better for it.
Mm-hmm. Straight up, man.
So yeah, thank you everybody for checking this out and listening. I hope something resonated. That's why I open my mouth, because I want to be able to say something that speaks to somebody. Other than that, thesmartestanimal.com, at thesmartestanimal, on Instagram, because other platforms take too much time to use. But that's why I got a website, honey. So
straight up,
pull up.
All right, man. Thanks again, man.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, that's that.